Outbreak. Festering Strike. Ooh. Death and Decay. And... Scourge. Epidemic. You want?
What? Talents?
Gear? Rotation?
What? You want to know how to play Unholy in Raids and Mythic Plus? Alright. Well, I guess this is the video for you since that's what you will be learning today. So, let's kick it off with the talents. Alright, what talents are you going to raid with? I'll tell you. On the first row, we take All Will Serve, where our Raise Dead spell will call upon the service of a second Skelly pet. It's just good for single target. Also good for single target is Ebon Fever on the second row. Virulent Plague will deal more damage in half the time, which of course is good in AoE as well, but this specific talent provides the most single target output on the row. Moving on, the third row is one of the utility rows, and as a rule of thumb, you can pick what you want from these rows, provided you can take advantage of it. Here we will have Asphyxiate for that juicy stun. Won't work on bosses, clearly, but it does work on certain ads, and really, what other options do we have? Use it on the little tiger ad on Jadefire Masters, or Raptors on Conclave, or any other such ads that are CCable. Fourth tier, exclusively Soul Reaper is the best option. You can read its tooltip and say, oh yeah, I get a haste buff if the target dies, but it won't be good for bosses. And I will tell you, read again. Yes, the main reason we want this baby is for the rune regeneration. Is very good. Next up, another utility role with all three being viable options, but each addressing a different situation. Choose what you think you would want, but if I were to suggest anything, go with Wraith Walk. God damn, Death Knights are slow as balls, and when you do shitty mechanics like the Grong ad, where you have to walk for hours from boss to ad, you might want to call your mama and ask how she's feeling. She will ramble on the phone for hours, and as she does, you know, normally, and once that phone call is done, you will still not be reaching point B from point A. Unless you take Wraith Walk. Take Wraith Walk and dodge the damn fires so you won't need the other options. Next up, contrary to popular belief, you will take, and I mean it, take Epidemic. Epidemic provides the least amount of single target damage on the row, but very close to the other two. Close enough that the AoE it actually does provide outweighs the lack of single target. Excepting the fights where you have one target always, and I mean always, you will take this one, and unless you want to switch talents every boss fight, you can probably set and forget. Moving on, last tier, Unholy Frenzy. I have to say that for someone who historically has played mainly Blood and Frost, switching to Unholy and picking this talent has given me huge throwbacks at Warcraft 3 when this spell was crazy flavorish. The haste is amazing of course, but more so the fact that you get to infect the target with festering wounds without actually spending the runes on Festering Strike is godsend. Especially with the current Azerite traits that are predominantly good for Unholy, and we will check those out in a bit. But not before we look at the Mythic dungeon build. I bet most of you are here for this part, and I cannot blame you. Unholy DKs have made a lot of noise in the MDI and surprisingly are not the most played DPS spec for dungeons. Maybe it has something to do with the rotation, which gave me the most problems learning. It's not straightforward, but that's for the rotation section. For the talents, on the first row we take Infected Claws, so that our ghoul applies festering wounds. Once you pop your monstrosity, it will do AoE damage and coincidentally apply festering wounds to multiple targets. Still with a 30% chance though. But it's one of the few reasons why Unholy works amazing in dungeons. The second reason is the second talent, and that is Bursting Sores. There's no secret here. Burst a wound and you deal AoE damage. Done deal. The secret comes later on. The next row has two viable options. The safest one if you are pugging is still Asphyxiate for those special boss ads or trash mobs in general. If you can communicate with your tank, Grip of the Dead can be a very good option in larger keys where you have the luxury of helping your tank kite the pack. Level 60 row, Soul Reaper for the same argument. Rune generation is the reason you will pop Soul Reaper in your rotation. Very rarely will you look to kill the target for the haste buff. If it happens, hurrah you! But once you get to the rotation, you'll understand more why this is important. Next up is the utility row again. That holds the same argument as before, although raid walk is not that important in dungeons, especially on hierarchies. Death Pack can really save your butt in tough situations. The way you have to think about it is like a bank loan. You get the health up front, but will not get any more heals until that health amount is healed through. Time this properly and you might not even need a heal on top of it. My advice is sometimes to use this preemptively. You have a lot of sustain with this strike and this baby, and if you can pop it to let your healer know, hey man, I'm good, heal the other fools, then you can potentially keep your group alive by simply letting your healer know that he or she does not have to heal your ass. Level 90, no surprise here, Epidemic is the go-to for max AoE damage. It won't consume the Virulent Plague, so dump as much runic power into it as you can. And lastly, Unholy Frenzy, again for the sweet haste and festering wounds. Although it's a good cooldown to use on bosses, primarily you want it on big trash pools since it's part of your rotation. When it comes to stats, for those of you who do not wish to sim, go with haste first and foremost. Haste is clearly good for more damage, but mostly for the rune regeneration, since we rely on it a lot, the reason we take Unholy Frenzy and Soul Reaper as talents. The rest is crit verse at around the same amount. These two are pretty close to each other in terms of strength. And lastly, mastery. As a point of reference, once you sim your character, you might get different values because haste will not be on top always, especially if you gear heavily towards it. My single target sims look something like this, with crit above haste. And of course, never forget the fact that weapon DPS, meaning eye level, will always be higher than every possible stat you can have on it. For AoE, my sims look like this, and you can take a note of this, especially haste and mastery, because these two will work wonders for AoE situations, which we will explore in a bit. For trinkets, checking websites like HeroDamage.com and BloodMelon.com can give you graphs which can tell you what trinkets will provide the most damage on paper. The standard single target ranking of trinkets looks something like this, with the Mechatorch trinket on top, followed by the Grong one, which most top Unholy Death Knights will use. For more AoE oriented situations, the new trinket that drops from Crucible is making an appearance, and I personally am a bit on the fence about this one. But to summarize, for raiding you want the Rage trinket from Mechatorch and the other Rage trinket from Grong. The Mechatorch trinket is pretty straightforward, gain haste and speed, which are two stats DKs cannot pass pretty much ever. The Grong one is a bit less straightforward, you have to use it and not move for 4 seconds or use abilities. It's not that big of a deal for Unholy because there are phases when you can stockpile resources and dump them fast, meaning 4 seconds of not doing the rotation is not punishing as it might be for other classes. For dungeons, primarily you should aim for Razan's Gleaming Eye that drops from a Tal Dazar. Again, a haste proc trinket, so not much to say here. The second one is the Gore-Crusted Butcher's Block from Waycrest Manor. Phew, quite a mouthful. These two have 15-second duration on their buffs, which work really well for AoE fights since that's about as much as you will fight large packs of mobs, maybe a few seconds longer. Now you can mix and match any of the 4 trinkets for your content. Stat proc trinkets are big DPS gains, so whichever is the highest is the one you should be using. The trinket from the Crucible raid, Lurker's Insidious Gift, is an option, but with a footnote. I've tested it on my Enhancement Shaman and the damage it ends up doing to me is around 200k HP at 420 eye level. Best eye level, am I right? The damage it gives is cray-cray in the membrane, but the downside might prove too much of a liability in heavy key situations, so I cannot recommend it in good conscience. Test it though, and if you can reliably get it to work, it might prove a major asset for you. Don't tell your healer though. Lastly, Azurite traits. Here we go. There are 3 main Azurite traits you'll be aiming for, one in particular being your sole goal. For all other slots, use whatever you have until you get the ones I will mention. The most important one for any type of content, raid or dungeon is Fester Might. This bad boy gives you a strength buff that lasts for 20 seconds and can stack. However, the duration does not refresh, meaning that once you proc it by bursting a wound, burst as many as you can as fast as you can so you can reach as many stacks until you cap at around 30. The bigger the pack you are fighting, the more stacks you will get. The next two traits are Magus of the Dead and Treacherous Covenant. You stack these two as much as you can, and if you really have the luxury of choosing between one or the other, then I would recommend simming to see which is better. These two work amazing both in raids and in dungeons. For secondary traits, Overwhelming Power is the best for single target and heed my call for AoE situations. Since you'll probably never have to choose between the two, just pick the one you will have. I've been looking up on what is the generally accepted rotation in the Unholy community, and there are differences from left to right, but only on minor things. Feel free, and I really mean it, to post your own rotation down in the comments, especially if you think I might have missed something. For the opener, assuming of course you'll have Bloodlust, start casting Army of the Dead a few seconds before the pool. Use Outbreak as your first ability, and as you walk towards the boss, pop Dark Transformation and Unholy Frenzy. Use one Festering Strike and consume your runing power on Death Coil. Once you reach 4 Festering Wounds, pop Apocalypse. Reaching 4 wounds should be easy, Festering Strike gives you 2 or 3 off the bat. Unholy Frenzy auto attacks give you wounds as well, and the chance proc from your pet also contributes to that. Only use Apocalypse with 4 wounds for maximum efficiency. After this, maintain the following priority. Keep Virulent Plague active. Use Soul Reaper when you have fewer than 2 runes. Cast Dark Transformation when available. Cast Apocalypse when the target has 4 Festering Wounds. Use Death Coil to prevent capping on runic power or when you have the Sudden Doom proc. Use Scourge Strike to burst wounds. And lastly, cast Festering Strikes once all wounds have fallen off the target. Now for the AoE, this is where things get a bit more interesting. Keep in mind that how your AoE rotation will work takes into consideration the amount of haste you have and the amount of mobs you fight. The opener is similar as for the single target, until it comes to actually bursting our wounds. I will go over the opener that I have had the most success with, so please feel free to correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. Like I said, there are a bunch of very nuanced factors that can influence and contribute to a quote perfect rotation, so feel free to practice it yourself and see what works. When approaching a pack, start with Outbreak again. Next, you want to pop Dark Transformation and Unholy Frenzy to start applying as many Festering Wounds on as many targets as possible. Use Festering Strike on as many targets as you can by swapping through them. All of this is to prepare for a big Death and Decay window. Pop said Death and Decay and start spamming Scourge Strikes on any mob that has a wound on it. Here you will use Soul Reaper once you are out of runes, as well as any trinket cooldowns as you can while consuming the runic power with Epidemic once you're out of runes or about to cap on runic power. The idea behind this rotation is to use the cleave you get within Death and Decay, so when you Scourge Strike a target, it bursts the wounds on all targets within cleave range. That's it. You'll have to practice it to perfect it. You will need to get a sense of how long the pack will live so you know how much time you can afford applying Festering Wounds. Once you start bursting the wounds, you don't want to stop because the Fester Might buff has a timer on it and you want to fit in as much damage in that window as possible. Practicing this enough can pretty much kill any pack of mobs of as many mobs as you want within that 20 seconds window. I tried to limit using Apocalypse in this situation since although it bursts wounds and gives Fester Might stacks, it doesn't cleave as much as Scourge Strike, so maybe use it once Death and Decay runs out or you're out of runes but your target still has 4 wounds on it. For consumables, either refer to your stat weights or simply go for haste on your rings and gems. There's no point in taking the expensive strength gems since strength doesn't really sim well for us. As a Death Knight, you have the additional perk of enchanting your own weapon free of charge, and you will always use Rune of the Fallen Crusader for that. Follow all of this up with the highest haste food you have, or you can be a lad and use a feast when raiding, since the difference in stat is much more impactful on food than anything else. For flasks and battle potions, take strength always, and you should be good to go and start smacking some faces. If you like our Unholy guide and maybe want to check some other videos that we have, there's a little link up in the corner where you can see our playlist for all of the class guides that we have so far and probably will have by the time you watch this video. Maybe there's an alt you want to play and we've already covered it. Go check it out, maybe you'll like it. Major thanks to our Patreons, Hellhunter, Ark, Maverick, Antimatter and Helldope. Guys, it means a lot for us that you're part of our team, and if anybody else wants to join our Patreon group, there's a link in the description with details and perks you're gonna be getting along the way. You can also check our Amazon affiliate link for our geeky Warcraft stuff or some of our recommendation if you're building your own PC for your WoW needs. Thanks for watching the video and being awesome. Take care and see you next time.